Most MSP owners believe that growth will fix everything: margins, stress, leverage, even valuation. But what if growth actually could magnify the problems that you haven't solved yet? Today's guest scaled an MSP from the startup stage to nearly 10 million in revenue, landing on the Inc. 500 list multiple times. And in this episode, we are going to discuss pricing mistakes, partner breakups, and why profitability, not revenue, is the real key to long-term success. Hello and welcome to Profit, Grow, Exit, the podcast for MSP owners who want to build valuable, scalable businesses, not just busy ones. I'm Abi Walsh from Encore Strategic, and today I'm joined by the president of Framework IT, Adam Barney. Hello, Adam, and thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Abby.
Absolutely. For those that don't know you, would you mind giving us just a quick introduction of yourself and your business?
Sure. Adam Barney, again, the president of Framework IT. I joined Framework very early on when it was just moving out of a basement in late 2009. Initially, I really focused on the growth engine for the company, led the sales and marketing efforts. We grew really fast, and over time, I had to slide in and kind of fix some things on the operation. So I actually stepped in as our COO for several years before going back and running, kind of operating as the CRO of the organization. And then about 5 years ago, I guess at this point, I stepped into the president role, leading the executive leadership team, kind of all aspects of the business.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into your story. But to start out, now you didn't start out in IT. You went into financial services initially. What made you jump into the MSP world?
Yeah, that's a funny story. So yeah, I did initially studied finance and business administration in school. It was always a topic I was really interested in and really thought that would be my career. And then I landed in internships in financial services, first in the securities and compliance division, which was very tedious and boring work. And then I slid into the financial advisor role. I really liked working directly with clients and people and doing the financial planning aspect. Again, just an area I kind of had a lot of personal passion about. But there were some things I didn't love in the industry, at least at that stage of my journey in the industry, where I felt like my interests weren't always totally aligned to clients, quite frankly. And it got to a point where I didn't feel excited about going to work anymore. It
Hmm.
wasn't the approach I wanted to take with clients, but early in that career, it was kind of where you have to begin. And so when I was approached to join Framework by one of the original founders, I really love the idea of being in the technology space, still having that consulting element of helping clients kind of resolve their problems, right, and align their business strategy with their technology strategy. Um, and I like the idea of getting into the kind of the B2B world as well. So really leapt at the opportunity, to leave something I was losing some passion for, and join something that I thought was a really exciting, space to be in. Given kind of the ever-changing nature of it, it seemed like a very promising area to kind of keep building on the entrepreneurial spirit. So I joined Framework after a little bit of courting with one of the original founders and, still one of my partners, John Corey.
Awesome. And now you mentioned that when you joined, it was very startup stages, moving out of a basement. What did running the company actually look like back then?
Creating everything from scratch. It looked like a blank whiteboard is probably the best way to
That's
describe
kind
it.
of
So
a fun time,
yeah,
though.
when I joined the company, the two original founders had just been running it on the side while working other jobs. You could consider it just purely a beta test, so to speak. So they got a first, dozen clients from prior experiences from personal network, etc. Right. But there was, almost non-existent structure, processes, people. And that's why I say it was a blank whiteboard. There was almost nothing. It was a few talented people and an idea. And that was, more or less it, and a couple contracts, right?
That's how all the best things start,
Yeah.
though. Now, you said in our previous conversation that you're not necessarily a technical person, but that's actually an advantage. Why do you think that is?
So I didn't come from a techie background, right? I was not the kid that was building computers or coding for fun. I studied finance and business administration, right? There's really no applicable skills there to managing IT infrastructure or software development or anything of that nature. And a reason I think that was a bit of advantage, and by the way, one of my primary business partners is very similar, comes from an accounting background. But where
Interesting.
I think that was advantageous to us is it forced us to build a business systems and process that could scale. So we had to focus really on building systems, right? And getting to a point where we could afford structurally to hire the engineering talent. On the
Mhm.
flip side, I think a lot of people in the MSP industry, a lot of MSPs are obviously started by engineers to decide to kind of go their own way. And that gives them unique advantages too. So I'm not bashing that approach. It's a very common entry point by any means, but they have the convenience of being able to actually do the work for the
Mhm.
clients. So that business owner that comes from that engineering background, especially early on, when it's a very small, IT services business, it's tempting to jump in directly and do the work for the clients for them. And I can
Absolutely.
understand why, right? If there's an emergency and they're a really experienced engineer and it's an important client, they want to just jump in and do it. But what that distracts them from is building the systems that scale a business.
That's one of the things
So
that we have to coach people out of a lot is jumping in and making the time to work on the business rather than in the business.
that's the
So,
simplest way to put it is you have
yeah.
to balance working on the business and working in the business. And because we didn't have the skills to work in certain areas of the business at all, it forced more balance, I would say, to us working on the business also.
Now, we're going to talk a lot about growth today. What is one early assumption that you had about business growth that turned out to be wrong?
Yeah. So we talked about making the 500 list, etc. We grew really fast. And one assumption we made that was maybe a bit naive is that we thought growth would fix profitability. That
Hmm.
as we scaled the company, a lot of roles don't need to be repeated. There's, economies of scale. At least that was our belief, right? That would grow the profit margins as the business grew. So we kind of felt like if we lead with the top line, the bottom line will expand. There is a little bit of truth to that in the managed services business, but it's not nearly as true as we had thought. This is still a very, at this point in time, labor intensive business, etc. So if you don't kind of architect the business with structural profitability as you're building and scaling revenue, it does not grow the profitability nearly as much as you might have thought or hoped. And so it's really important to build that in earlier, I would say. And that was a lesson we learned, like many lessons, the painful way.
That's okay. That's what this podcast is all about, is how to learn those lessons. When you were going out and trying to land those early clients, what did you find was the hardest part of that when you have no references, you're just getting credibility?
Yeah, that the earliest clients are the hardest, right? You don't have the case studies, you don't have the testimonials, the client references. You just don't even have all of the things in place that convey the maturity that brings credibility and trust. And ultimately, in the IT services business is very much a trust-based relationship. They are handing the keys to the critical infrastructure that their entire business sits on, right? And a lot of clients are very aware of the sensitivity of that. And so they have to really deeply trust who they're going to work with. And so when you're early on and young as an organization, and we were young as people on top of that,
Mhm.
that is really challenging to go in there and, build up that credibility and trust when all of your marketing and sales assets aren't as polished as your competitors, when your references are more sparse, your testimonials are more sparse, et cetera. So that is a very hard part of the journey, is to build that first critical mass, because from there it gets easier and easier.
Right.
And I still see that unfolding today, even as we just continue to mature and what have you, the speed at which we can build credibility continues to increase.
Yeah, and it's a really good point about the age too. I hadn't really considered that when we first talked, but that is, it goes into the credibility for sure. Now, we did talk a little bit about a trap that nearly everyone falls into, which is the saying yes to everything and everyone, which a lot of people do when they first start out. Now, how did those maybe bad fit clients show up operationally as you began to scale?
Yeah, we I see a lot of MSPs falling in this trap. We fell in this trap too, right? Of especially early on, you're trying to get to a certain point of sustainability, et cetera, right? It's really just tempting to take on any work that you can do. But the problem is was when you take on those poor fit clients or you get into those projects with technology that you're not really well suited for, the relationship is inefficient
Mm,
ultimately. You don't deliver the projects very profitably. The managed services agreement isn't really making any money. It's keeping you busy, it's bringing in revenue, but really nothing falls to the bottom line from it. So it doesn't really feed any kind of feedback loop to reinvest in the company. But probably most importantly is that can be a real drain on your time and attention. A lot of the
mhm.
times, those poor fit clients, this is not even necessarily their fault by any means. It's not implying they're bad people, but when they're a poor fit for you, it tends to take up a whole lot of your time and attention, which you're now not investing in going and finding and delivering great work for the great fit clients. So ultimately, it leads to this really reactive cycle of busy work that's stressful and isn't really moving the ball forward for your organization ultimately.
Absolutely. And now to kind of hone in on that, if you were to start over today, how early would you define your ideal client profile and why would it be so important?
Oh my gosh, we thought we did, by the way, but we were not nearly specific enough. So I
I
like
think
day
a
one.
lot of people think that they do, when we cut and they're like, "Oh yeah,
Yeah.
totally," but it's so big and it's like, "No, you gotta bring it in."
Yeah, we framed it probably way too loose off a little bit of demographic criteria and not enough kind of qualitative or psychographic elements of how they think, et
Mhm.
cetera. And so I would say I would have put much deeper thought into it on day one when I came in, right? When we were trying to go from the first beta test of a handful or a dozen clients or whatever it was to start really building a scalable, repeatable engine on the sales and marketing side to bring in new clients. I wish I would have stepped back and put much, much deeper thought into what that ideal client profile looks like, defined it much more strictly, and been much more disciplined about adhering to it.
Absolutely. I We see it time and time again. You just have to hone in, bring it down, and then stick to it very strictly, probably more, like you mentioned, more so than you think you are.
And and it can be uncomfortable when you're early on and
Mhm.
maybe you're burning through cash or
Oh,
savings if you're like a solopreneur, right? And so
yeah.
that's where that scarcity mindset comes into play. And you start just chasing any revenue to kind of fill this gap. Um, and so, and there's something to say for balance, right? You can't run out of money as you're scaling a business. You do have to sustain and survive there.
Yeah.
However, too many people get completely swayed by that scarcity mindset. And so, trying to take more of that abundance mindset and do
Mhm.
what's right up front, I think, can obviously get you to where you want to go much quicker, but it's painful in the moment to make those tough decisions and say no to a lot of revenue when you're still just trying to like close the gap um, as you're building the business very early on.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, talking about your growth, you guys grew very quickly. You hit the Inc. 500 list and the Inc. 5000 list multiple times. What wasn't visible behind that success? What do folks not see?
Um, the growth itself wasn't easy. When you hear that companies hit that, it makes it sound like their machine to generate leads and close business must have been a perfect flywheel. It was not. We challenged or were challenged to get enough good qualified leads in the top of the funnel. Sales process once things were in funnel had tons of room for improvement. We didn't solve all those things early on during that window of time where we made the Inc. 500 5,000 list like 7 times in 10 years. We did not have all that figured out. From afar, you might think we did, right? Because it looked like such a successful engine, but it struggled at times. And then the other big answer to that question is scaling operationally isn't easy, right? So even if your engine is adequate enough to spit out that kind of growth, scaling your operations, especially in a business like managed services, which is complex in terms of systems, people, processes, right? There's a lot of moving pieces. Scaling that is not easy. So, 3 years into that kind of rapid growth, that became really challenging. That was around the time that I slid into the COO role because
Mhm.
the foundation was starting to crack and shake, so to speak. You can't
Right.
rely on muscle and feel at a certain level of scale. You actually have to build repeatable systems, processes, people development, et cetera. And so that was a lot of the work I did as the COO was kind of, I would say, rebuilding the foundation and the structure and the walls
Mhm.
because we were outgrowing the ability to sustain that growth at that point.
Yeah, that's really incredible. And now you had some leadership burnout during that phase and actually had to part ways with a partner. Tell us a little bit about that and how it affected your leadership and your business.
Yeah, one of the, frankly, the original founders of the firm involved before I came in the door. As we started to grow really quickly, I think we kind of felt like he was looking for more of a lifestyle business and
Mhm.
experience, and wasn't ultimately going to be able to provide the leadership, both on kind of the people side, but also maturing the processes and the system side of things. And he still kind of almost wanted to behave a bit like an employee, right? As opposed to a leader, an entrepreneur, and a builder. We really tried to, I think, address it fairly. We tried to level our concerns and talk about, can we reframe him? Can we shift the behavior conversationally? Reached a point where it was very clear he was kind of unwilling to engage even in that type of conversation. And that was frankly kind of the trigger moment where myself, I've been one of the other founders who's still my partner, looked at each other and said, we're stuck. We
Mm.
can't move forward with this person. They're resistant to even hearing the feedback or discussing what we think needs to change, what that might look like, et cetera. So we had to make the tough decision to fire one of the original founders as an employee first, right? We terminated his employment
Mhm.
because we had a still majority equity ownership of the company between the other original founder and myself. And then we had to engage in conversations that I think took 2 years or 3 years to actually just buy out his equity and kind of fully extract him out of the business. So a painful, part of the journey very
Yeah,
early on.
absolutely. I can imagine was a really tough decision that took a lot of hard conversations, but I think it's such an important story for listeners who might be going through something similar for sure.
You know, I I'm in a number of industry peer groups. This is not uncommon. I met other
Mm.
companies that are struggling with the partnership dynamic. And I guess here's what I'll say, because I know we have a lot of other topics to talk about is, I mean, I wouldn't throw in the towel and just move on right away. Try to work it out within the partnership, right? But
Mhm.
if you reach a point where you start seeing that there is no viable solution coming, like
Mhm.
then you need to move quickly. It's kind of like the hiring mentality, right? Of hire slow, fire
Right.
fast. Too many
Yeah.
people let partnership issues drag on for years and years and years. And here's the thing: if I think we had not done what we did, we would be nowhere near where we are today. If we'd left him in an operational leadership role that he was in the time, there's no way this company would be where it is. So painful at the time, but you need to do it for the greater good, not even just yourself and your other partners who maybe are aligned, but for all the employees and clients, etc.
Right. And so you've been through that experience. You guys have reshaped, decided on a new path, and you were really focused on growth for a long time. That was the priority. And then you told me a little bit about what forced the shift towards profitability versus growth.
So about around 2019 up and through 2023, we started having a lot of great and very deep reflection. We started asking ourselves, what really makes us different?
Mhm.
Further, that was really when we started defining the target client profile and stakeholder personas on a much, much deeper level than we had. And these happened in kind of steps and evolutions. And, um, and then we started looking deeply into industry data. And that was eye opening for us because we had been this growth engine and even outside parties would validate, how amazing it was we grew. But we always felt like the profitability element was not growing at the speed at which we would have liked. It was really subpar, et cetera. And as we started digging into the details of industry data, it became kind of really apparent what the issue was that, we couldn't just scale in structural profitability through efficiency of scale. That would
Mhm.
help a little, but it wasn't going to close the gap we needed to close to get to kind of that best in class profitability in our industry. And so what changed was we realized we were building a business that would keep you really busy, but that you could probably build a business that was half the size and make just as much money for, the kind of the key stakeholders and owners, and probably provide higher quality, better outcomes for the client. So all around a more win-win value proposition, et cetera. And so at that point, we really shifted. Priority had always been top line growth first, worry about, earnings, so to speak, second. We flipped those two and said, we want to grow structural profitability as the primary objective, with organic top line growth being secondary, meaning it's top line growth is still important,
Mhm.
absolutely, but we will not engage in top line growth, if it isn't going to help with that kind of bottom line growth. That mentality shift enforced so much more discipline, a more strict approach to target client profile, really helped us focus and say no, more clearly to anyone that, I don't even want to say like is like an F client, right? But even say
Mhm.
no to the C client, right? Type
Yeah.
of thing. And that makes a huge difference. Again, it can be uncomfortable in the moment. It's a little bit of a leap of faith moment of like, okay, I'm going to step off the cliff and start saying no to a bunch of business that isn't a great fit for me. Um, we're not used to that. When you first start doing that, it feels very risky. Like, is this going to work out? Am I actually going to compromise the business as I do this? Am I not going to win
Absolutely.
enough revenue to be sustainable and hit my goals, etc.? But the people that have hit that moment, gone through that kind of shift to a very disciplined focus, all tend to look back within a few years and say it was the best move they ever made. Again, I hear this in peer groups, etc. So
Mhm.
another little takeaway I would share is I wish we would done all of that sooner, not just focusing on that target client profile, but just getting very, very disciplined, saying no to business more often. I think we would even be much further along than we are had we started that evolution earlier in our journey.
And I think, obviously Sean, who founded Encore, is one of the authors of the Pumpkin Plan for Managed Service Providers, where we talk about this and we coach our clients on it. And so often, the folks who are most scared to make that change and cut loose those, C clients and so on, come back and say, oh, my business is so much more nice to run, so much more fun to run now because you're working with folks who truly get it.
Yeah, I when you don't do that, the business can often feel like a dam that has a
Yes.
thousand leaks, and you only have a
And you're
hand with so many
plugging
fingers, and you are constantly
right.
running around plugging those leaks, but it's never enough because you're over here plugging a bunch and new leaks are appearing. That's what a bunch of poor fit client revenue
Yeah.
leads to: busy work, chaos, frankly, just stress and
Yeah.
burnout and all these things. And so yeah, again, it's painful. I get it. Emotionally, it's tough. It's risky. It feels really risky, right? It may not be in that most of the people that do it get the successful outcome. I can't say every single one does, but most do. And the people usually that are struggling the most are the ones that stay in that scarcity mindset and
Mhm.
don't do it. And they stay in this cycle of reactivity, chaos, etc. Now, having been down this journey for a few years of being more disciplined about these things, I can just see that the level of noise, the level of chaos, the level of leaks is a fraction of what it used to be. I mean, a tiny fraction. And it's amazing what that allows you to do in terms of focusing, working on the business more instead of in the business, et cetera. So it's been a huge game changer. Um, I think everyone should study kind of abundance and scarcity mentality and
Absolutely.
start thinking about how am I looking at this? Am I looking at this with scarcity mentality or the abundance mentality? And
Right.
it'll make a huge difference. Start looking at things that way.
And when you start getting into those mentalities too, you learn what you focus on expands. So if you're focusing on abundance, that's what's gonna happen. Now you've mentioned your peer group a few times, and we're talking about reactivity. What you've said joining a peer group earlier would have changed everything. Why is that?
Because prior to that, we had, humbly, I'll say, relatively talented people, but we didn't know everything. Again, we were young too, on top of that. So it's not like we grew up within mature managed service providers and left and brought over all of that experience with us. And so We were operating in the dark, is the best way I would describe it. We had walked into a room, pitch black, and we were feeling our way around this room, right? And that leads to bumping into things. You hit your head, you stumble, whatever, right? And you get back up and you keep moving around, and slowly you're starting to get the picture of this room in your mind. That is kind of how I think about our experience growing into understanding this business. So all that growth and stuff, what that really looked like was two steps forward, falling over on our face, getting back up, two steps, over and over again. Luckily, we were persistent and we kept getting up. But when you get in the peer groups, you start learning from everybody else's accumulated experience.
Mm-hmm.
You also often start getting access to a lot of data on at least your peer group members, but maybe even a broader set of data on similar companies in the industry. And so that's the equivalent of walking into the room with at least some level of light on now, far greater awareness of the landscape around you right away. And so, yeah, that's one of the other kind of top things I would say I wish I would have done much, much sooner is, stop thinking, I can do this on my own or smart, I'll figure this out. I have creative new insights that others don't. No, there's no penalty for copying success in business, generally speaking, right? As long as you're not infringing
Mm-hmm.
on IP and trademarks and what have you, right? But when it comes to like this industry, it's so fragmented, meaning, it's not one company dominating market share. We have loads of peers
Yeah.
in different geographies or different focuses that we don't overlap. So there is an incredible ability to be very open and transparent and share what is working for us and not what is not working for us. And why reinvent the wheel? When you
Mm-hmm.
can just see the successful organization, how they're operating, how they're going to market, et cetera, and you can borrow the best of that and implement it in your business. So that's the kind of secret of the peer groups. And then the last part of it is you get like a free board of advisors. Most small MSPs, right, do not have a real board with experienced members, and entrepreneurship can be lonely. Even when you have partners, it can still feel lonely.
Absolutely.
So having that, the camaraderie, the support element, but again, also just the clarity it provides all around, I think everyone should do it.
I couldn't have said it better myself. So if we have MSP owners that are listening that are skeptical of peer groups, I hope you turn up the volume.
Yeah.
All right. So let's jump into a little bit of AI discussion because it is such a buzzword in our industry right now. And you mentioned that you think that AI is going to be a bigger disruption than cloud or cybersecurity. Why is that?
So, the cloud, to me, that was just a change in technology, right? And it impacted the MSP business model, no doubt. Um, Cybersecurity, really, the trend there of increasing threats, increasing awareness, et cetera, drove far greater adoption of cybersecurity and forced managed services providers to get more mature and expand their offer there and kind of incorporate more and be more of a leader for the clients on that, less of an order
Mhm.
taker. Oh, you want this, and more of, hey, you need all of this. And I believe that so much, right? That if we're going to work together, this has to be the baseline standard.
Mhm.
So those weren't fundamental shifts across the board in how you operate, how you deliver services, etc. And I think what's coming with AI will actually be a fundamental shift entirely in how we deliver our value proposition to organizations, right? Um, Over time, more and more of the support, it's my belief, will be delivered by agents.
Yeah.
The help desk, so to speak, will be highly augmented with agents, human in the loop still. And over time, we may see that even recede and eventually become largely driven by agents, with some orchestration, maybe an oversight still, of course, from people at key critical junctures. And so that's a huge shift for managed services providers because it's my belief that clients, at least, perceive our value to come roughly according to these percentages. They probably see about half the value that they pay to a managed service provider to come from support, about a
Mhm.
quarter to the strategic consulting, let's say, and a quarter to the cybersecurity that we're providing. Maybe I'm off 10% or something, but it sounds about right when I think about all the
Yeah.
conversations I've had with clients and how they tend to think about this service. Now imagine as, agents mature, their capabilities, the underlying technology matures, and your competitors integrate this into their service delivery model successfully. That help desk component, if it's 50% of a, we'll call it $200 user price, just to make the math simple, that $100 is going towards support. Well, what happens when a competitor has integrated that extremely well into their service delivery model and they're able to do the help desk at 30,
Mm,
$50 a user, right? You'll see more AI and automation first, MSPs
mhm.
offering self-service models with escalation to humans
Yeah.
on more of an as needed basis. So it's going to potentially put a lot of price kind of compression and pressure on the industry. Again, very fundamentally shifting how we deliver our services. And I'm just picking on the support side, but that's not the end
Yeah.
all be all of it. I mean, some of the strategic delivery, the intake of information, the turnaround and output of that in digestible chunks for the strategic consulting side and reporting to clients can all be automated. Your back office operations can be severely automated. Probably won't replace entirely the human element of trust building on the front end with sales, but so much of the back end work that goes into discovering, things for a client, organizing that information for your service team, pricing services intelligently, delivering roadmaps or proposals to clients. A lot of that back end work can be compressed with automation. And so this is fundamentally going to restructure how we operate kind of across every department in the business. And that's why I see this
Yeah.
as a potentially a bigger change and a bigger moment that kind of might send us down two paths of the haves and haves nots.
It's a
And
really interesting take on it. So, if things like help desks start becoming commoditized, where do you think MSPs are going to have to create value?
yeah, that's a wonderful question, right? If you commoditize this piece that the clients have seen as the majority of the value, you have a
Mhm.
few options. Just let the overall value shrink, which is going to be painful. That means probably, shrinking revenue per client, things like that, right? Or you have to expand somewhere else, the value you're
Mhm.
creating. So the cybersecurity is not going away. That part I think is relatively protected. AI has
Yeah.
already been built into those products, right? And we're reselling those products though. So us as managed service providers, we don't get a huge part of that value chain because we're reselling whatever it is, Sentinel One, Sophos, et cetera. You name the whole cybersecurity stack. But we're not going to add a ton more value in that loop directly on the cybersecurity side. The value we're going to provide is on the strategy side, right? Delivering the right stack of cybersecurity tools, of IT management systems, and increasingly, and this part is important, I guess, to more directly answer your question, I'll call it the intelligence layer, so to speak, right? So helping our clients make this curve jump in their own industry because this isn't just ours that's going to be disrupted top down. Other businesses, to varying degrees, are going to face massive disruption in the coming years because of the same technology working its way into their operations, trying to keep up with their competitors, and possibly even entirely new business models that challenge theirs that are built kind of with the technology first and foremost. And so that's where I think we need to kind of augment is on
Mm.
the strategy side, the VCIO, so to speak, needs to change. Right now, the strategy side is largely infrastructure focused, managing, against compliance, best practices, cybersecurity, et cetera. I think that MSPs need to get kind of deeper into the business layer on the process side and help implement kind of secure and scalable AI and AI based automation to help these clients survive and thrive as their own industries get disrupted. And so I won't take credit for this, but PAX 8 wrote a great report about the managed intelligence provider. They kind of
Mhm.
renamed, the industry of, we're managing the intelligence stack at some point in the future because the support side might be highly automated. We're helping deliver, the business intelligence, the data, et cetera. And of course, still the cybersecurity. And that probably becomes the place for the managed service provider. It won't happen overnight, but I do agree with
Mhm.
their report. I really think that is kind of where the industry is heading.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree. And differentiation is certainly going to be key. Now, speaking of differentiation, what do you think will differentiate winning MSPs in, say, the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think they need to develop the winning MSPs will develop the muscle to deliver the intelligence stack, right?
Hmm.
So that is they're going to require big changes. The current CIOs in the industry, by and large, right, have always come from the infrastructure side. They have not gotten deeply into the workflow, the business, the data intelligence with inside their clients for the most part, from what I see. And so we fundamentally have to approach that consulting in a different way and really dive into kind of business problems first. The infrastructure management side, I think, becomes table stakes, honestly, not really a differentiator to manage the life cycle and the assets, et cetera, as more and more of it becomes automated. So the ability to go in and kind of be more of the business consultant that knows how to help implement the intelligence and automation is where you're going to have to differentiate and where you're going to have to succeed even internally in your own operations.
Mhm.
Probably brings up a good point. You're not going to leap to being that person, that consultant to your clients on day one. You need to be that person to yourself internally first, right? To
Yeah.
build that muscle and then crawl, walk, run with your ability to deliver that to clients to the point where you can really deliver that at scale and very maturely.
Mhm.
So I think the MSPs that are going to succeed are frankly the ones that shift to that model and kind of approach more rapidly. And the ones that believe the old way is going to work for the next 10 years,
Mhm.
I think are going to increasingly fall behind.
Yeah. No, I would definitely agree. And I think that's really good piece of advice. And speaking of advice, if you could give three rules or pieces of advice to MSP owners who are listening, that are earlier in their stages, maybe in revenue, maybe in growth, and maybe just starting up, what would that be?
Um, Clearly define that target client profile and hyper focused on it. Okay. Say no to more, disqualify more upfront, get used to it. You'll thank me later for that one, big time. And then I would also say, I think, join the peer groups early on. I know really early on too, it can be tough with like the expense side of that. You're like,
Mhm.
it's not just the fee for the peer group, it's the travel, it's all of that. Pays for itself. Join peer groups. It is huge. Uh, dig into the data in this industry. Benchmark yourself against best in class and
Mhm.
do everything you can to pull the levers to move towards alignment towards that sooner, I would say. But more broadly, I would also just say, like, take an abundance mentality. The scarcity mentality, I think, drives so many short term decisions that
Mhm.
seem good short term and may be good in the very short term, but those all become painful things you have to unwind later. And
Yeah.
maybe the last one is price your services higher. I see a lot of new MSPs underpricing, quite honestly.
Yes.
And you cannot price the service over what it costs you to deliver at your current size, scale, and maturity today. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're a 5 person team. Maybe we're one of those engineer founders. You can do some of that work yourself, type of thing. It's real tempting and easy to go in at too low of pricing, but someday that you want to have service coordinators, service managers, operational leaders, accounting, finance, marketing people. You have to price that all in now so you can afford it.
Yeah, and then you don't have the reactivity of having to increase prices later on or
Exact. So most of us
substantial increase.
underprice in the beginning,
Mhm.
and then we spend a lot of time having to go basically upsell and reprice those clients later.
Yes. Now, we've talked about hurdles that you've overcome, maybe things that you wish that you had done differently. Now, let's talk about your success and what does that look like for you now? What's the next goal?
Yeah, I think relating it back to the conversation we've been having, the the best part of where we're at today is that those reactive fires, the noise, the million leaks in the dam is not entirely gone, right? There's always going to be, some issues in the business, right? Some client fires or what have you. But that has shrunk from taking so much time and attention to just being a tiny sliver of it. So what that has really changed, more importantly, is the ability to focus on like the bigger things, the things that could really move the needle for the business, to not be constantly tactically managing the day-to-day execution, but to be more strategic and to really develop the engine for the business. and not just the engine for today, but like the engine for tomorrow, even as it relates to that AI and automation element. So that, a lot of the things I talked about today have allowed us to shift significant amount of leaders' time into figuring out how to retool the business to adopt AI and AI based automation across all the different departments in our organization and to figure out how we can go to market and help our clients implement and adopt that in their business. If we were still in that kind of more reactive loop, that we've been discussing and reacting to too much noise and fires, we would absolutely have not be in any position to prepare for this next evolution of technology and ultimately of business.
Mhm.
Um, and therefore, I don't think we would have a long term future if we didn't have that ability to prepare for that, right? Because this is not something you just flip a switch and switch into overnight. You don't just go, okay, drop some agents in our organization and it fixes everything. This, like anything in business, has to be assessed. Risks have to be addressed. You have to figure out how this fits into your processes or how they have to adjust. People need to adjust, right? Which has takes time, it takes thought, etc. And AI doesn't
Does.
take that away, right? Like
Mhm.
that's on the business leaders, right, to help drive into their organization. So um, we have the luxury, I would say, of being able to invest significant time and resource into thinking about that at this point.
Absolutely. I think what I appreciate most about your story is that it really highlights the long game. And you're honest that the wins didn't happen overnight, but that they came from years of making tough decisions and learning from mistakes and continually investing in your business and the people around you.
Yeah, our original founder, his I think his profile on Twitter says he's a failure expert. You know? So, it's like that, maybe you would ask kind of other things I would have tell people to take away. I should have said this: persistence.
Hmm.
Persistence wins. Like Edison failed him tons of times,
Yeah,
right? But then he got there, right? So that's if I could tell, one characteristic I would like to see in other leaders that I'm trying to coach into my children, it's persistence.
yeah,
It's probably number one. It doesn't mean you don't know when to stop. Knowing when to quit is very important. Great book on that by Annie Du. But the but persistence itself can overcome so many challenges. And so,
absolutely.
it's couldn't be a more underrated skill, I guess, in that regard.
I completely agree with you there. You got to get up and try again.
Yep.
Well, I just want to thank you for sharing your story and your perspective and some of the lessons that you've learned along your MSP journey. I know the MSP owners who are listening today are going to walk away with a lot to think about after this. So thank you.
Yeah. I hope they reflect on some of the things we talked about and where they are internally or their business. And make some of those tough choices. And like I said, I understand it is emotional and there can be a lot of fear and uncertainty, and you kind of have to step off this cliff without a parachute and take a leap of faith moment. But you're not alone in that many others have done some of these things I've discussed. And the
Hmm.
vast majority of them, again, look back later and say it was the right thing to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me, Abby. I really enjoyed the conversation.